Back then, I didn't even get to sit at the table. Elliot always said I was too soft-spoken, too plain, too not ready for the world he lived in. When he brought me around his friends, I was the invisible girlfriend, the girl he never quite introduced. I'd hover near the coat check or sip wine in the corner while he laughed with models and influencers, flashing that smile he'd perfected for the cameras. They never asked who I was. I was always just the girl behind the door. I was 19, fresh from a small town, with a scholarship and a dream. He was 24, already driving a midnight blue Maserati, already shaking hands with tech moguls who looked at me like I didn't belong. But I was in love, foolishly so. I told myself I was just a work in progress, that he'd eventually stop keeping me a secret. Then came the night of the Blackstone Gala. It was the biggest event of the year, an invitation-only affair for the venture capital elite. Elliot said I wasn't on brand for the kind of image he was trying to build. He said it like a joke, like it didn't hurt. But the driver still pulled up in front of his condo, and I still stood in our bedroom in a dress I'd saved for months to buy, watching him leave without me. That night, I left him. Quietly. No screams, no accusations. Just a suitcase and the savings he didn't know I had. He didn't even call. Now, 7 years later, I sit at the head of a table in a glass-walled boardroom, holding a contract with his company's logo stamped across the top. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm about to become his gatekeeper. His name flashes across the slides being projected at the front of the room: Elliot North, CEO of North Verge, a flashy startup with a shallow product and a deeper PR team. His pitch deck is all buzzwords and borrowed confidence. He wants funding. Distribution. A foothold in a luxury market that isn't built for pretenders. And I own the only firm that can give it to him. Will he be joining the call? I ask, glancing at the representative sitting across from me. The poor guy stammers, pushing up his glasses. Mr. North prefers to handle investor meetings personally. He'll be here shortly. I smile. Perfect. When Elliot walks in 15 minutes later, his entrance is as dramatic as I remember. Tailored charcoal suit, self-assured smirk, a timepiece that probably costs more than my first apartment. He doesn't look twice at me. To him, I'm just another executive. Another obstacle. He shakes hands, slides into a seat, and launches into his pitch without hesitation. I watch him talk. Watch him charm. Watch him toss out half-truths about market potential and vertical growth strategies. It's all so rehearsed. When he finally looks at me, really looks. There's a flicker of something in his eyes. A pause. I give him nothing. Just a nod. Just another nameplate on the table. So, he finishes, leaning back, confident, I believe this is the beginning of a very profitable relationship. I tap my pen against the edge of the contract. I'm not convinced yet. That wipes the grin off his face. His team fumbles to offer talking points. I let them flounder for a moment before I glance at my assistant, who wordlessly sets down a revised proposal. One I had drafted last night, tightening the terms, raising the valuation bar, inserting escape clauses that give us full control if they underperform. Elliot stares at it, jaw tightening. You're asking for a lot, he says finally. I lean forward. I'm offering more. Our eyes meet. There's a twitch in his expression, like something's trying to surface. Have we met before? He asks, the question sharp but hesitant. Not officially, I say coolly. The meeting wraps an hour later. His team leaves, murmuring to each other. Elliot lingers. I pretend to check my phone. You remind me of someone, he says. I glance up. Do I? He watches me for a second too long, then nods once and walks away. I wait until the door closes before I allow myself a breath. He doesn't remember. Not yet. But he will. And when he does, he'll wish he never opened that door. The thing about Elliot was, he never remembered the people he stepped on. He collected names like trophies, only polishing the ones that helped him shine. The rest? Forgotten. Discarded. I was one of the many ghosts left in the wake of his ambition. But now I was the shadow in his mirror, watching quietly as he tried to claw his way up my ladder. After the boardroom meeting, his company scrambled. A dozen follow-up emails. Revised terms. A desperate request for a private meeting to clarify a few points. I ignored them for a week. Power is best served cold, not loud. When I finally responded, I didn't sign my name. Just a confirmation from my assistant that the meeting was set, Tuesday 5 p.m., at my private office. I made sure it was after sunset. He arrived early. Typical. Always trying to dominate the room before the conversation even starts. Nice office, he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. He did a slow turn, eyes drinking in the dark wood, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the minimalist steel decor. Very cold. Efficient, I corrected, motioning to the seat across from mine. He looked at me again, brow slightly furrowed. Something about me was bothering him, gnawing at the edge of recognition. I could see it in the way his gaze lingered on my eyes, then dropped to my mouth, then back again. But I'd changed. Back then, I had been soft-spoken and sweet, with long brown curls and too much hope in my eyes. Now, my hair was short and sleek. My voice clipped. My wardrobe a silent declaration that I wasn't here to please anyone. I've reviewed your updated proposal, I said, sliding a folder across the desk. We're willing to move forward, but under stricter oversight. I'll be appointing someone to your executive advisory board. His smile faltered. That's unusual. It's protection, I replied. For my investment. He flipped through the pages, frowning at the clauses he couldn't quite talk his way around. Then, finally, he looked up and asked, "What's your angle?" My angle? I echoed, playing innocent. You don't just hand out second chances like this. Not to people like me. You're either looking to take control of my company, or something else. I met his gaze, cool and unwavering. Maybe I just believe in redemption arcs. He laughed. You don't strike me as the sentimental type. I smiled faintly. People change. He stared again. Harder this time. I could see it now. His brain was working, turning pages in some forgotten mental archive. I swear, I know you from somewhere, he said. Your voice. It's familiar. I leaned back in my chair. If we're done here, I'll have my assistant send over the signed terms by morning. He didn't move. What's your name? I tilted my head. You've had it in your inbox for weeks. He opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. Because just then, the door opened. And in walked Davis. My right hand. My strategist. The one who had quietly acquired two of Elliot's minor competitors in the last 3 months. Bad time? Davis asked, feigning politeness. Perfect timing, I said. Mr. North was just leaving. Elliot stood slowly, eyes narrowing. He sensed it now. Something was wrong. This wasn't just another investor meeting. This wasn't about numbers and pitch decks. This was personal. He just didn't know why yet. As he walked past Davis, I caught the brief flash of tension in his jaw. Have a good night, I said lightly. He didn't respond. After he was gone, Davis turned to me with a grin. He's going to lose sleep over this. Good, I said, picking up the untouched coffee beside me. He should. Davis, Saturday, you really want to go through with this? I want him to feel what it's like to build something only to watch it burn in someone else's hands. He'll figure it out eventually. I looked out the window. That's the point. Because this wasn't about recognition. This was about power. He didn't have mine anymore. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks after our second meeting, Elliot North's name was trending, but not in the way he wanted. A leaked memo from one of his executives hinted at unstable financials. Speculation followed. Rumors. Questions about inflated valuation figures. A whisper campaign spreading through the investor circles, just loud enough to cause doubt, just quiet enough to seem organic. I didn't have to do much. I just made a few well-placed calls. Opened a few doors. And watched him walk into every trap. The industry he was trying to break into, luxury AI interfaces, wasn't kind to outsiders. It was niche, cutthroat, and heavily controlled by legacy players. And I had made sure over the last 4 years to sit comfortably at the center of it. The media started poking holes in Northverge's narrative. A few tech blogs exposed inconsistencies in their launch timeline. Then came the hit from the London arm of Nexus Capital, my firm. An anonymous executive, close to the deal, confirmed we were re-evaluating the partnership due to concerns about internal leadership. That was the first time he called me directly. I let it ring. Twice. Then I answered on speaker, letting Davis hear every word. Hello? His voice was tight, clipped, but controlled. This is Helena, I said smoothly. Helena, he repeated. Right. We need to talk. Face to face. You're killing my company. I haven't done anything, I replied. We're still considering the partnership. Don't insult my intelligence. He was angry now. Good. Emotion made him sloppy. I'll make some time next week, I said coolly. But I suggest you prepare answers. He exhaled sharply. What do you want from me? Oh, Elliot, I murmured, just enough to make him pause. If I wanted something from you, you'd already know. I ended the call. Davis chuckled. You almost sounded sentimental. I just wanted him to hear his name on my tongue again. Maybe that's what's bothering him. In truth, Elliot's unease had already begun to show. At a recent investor summit, he looked haunted, less polished, more reactive. I made sure to attend that one. I didn't approach him, just made sure to walk by twice, made sure he saw me surrounded by power players he used to chase but never catch. He watched me with growing suspicion. His smile faltered the second time I passed. I kept walking. And behind me, his empire started to wobble. The key to dismantling him wasn't brute force, it was subtle erosion. I didn't want to destroy him in a blaze of glory. I wanted him to crumble slowly, doubting every person, every decision, until he couldn't tell friend from enemy. Meanwhile, I began feeding one of his co-founders' private offers. Not enough to alert Elliot, but enough to plant seeds of division. And they took root quickly. One late night, Davis slid a manila envelope across my desk. We've got something. I opened it. Internal emails. Proof that Elliot had falsified early beta results to secure a first-round seed. Not illegal. But unethical. Enough to stir serious doubt. I smiled. Let's leak it to his newest investor. That'll kill his next funding round. That's the idea. Davis hesitated. He still doesn't recognize you? He thinks I'm a ghost from his past, I said. But he hasn't put the name to the face. He will. I want him to. And so I orchestrated the next move. I invited him to the Nexus Winter Gala, a black tie event for our highest-tier partners. The kind of event where Elliot used to think I didn't belong. Only this time, my name was on the invitation. And his only way in was through me. He arrived alone. I saw him before he saw me. Dressed immaculately, trying to project control, but scanning the room a little too fast, his jaw just a little too tight. He spotted me near the main hall, talking to a senator's daughter and the CEO of a European tech firm. I excused myself before he could approach. He caught up with me by the champagne bar. You planned this, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Planned what? I replied, taking a glass from the tray. You've been bleeding my company from the inside out. I sipped. Or maybe it's just a flawed company. He stepped closer. Who are you? Finally. The question. I looked up at him, meeting his eyes full on. I'm the girl you left behind in a cheap dress while you chased headlines. The color drained from his face. I smiled. But that's not my name anymore. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. And in a way, he was. Because the girl he humiliated didn't exist anymore. But the woman who replaced her? She was holding the strings now. Elliot didn't speak. Not at first. He stood there, pale and speechless, while the hum of the gala pressed in around us. Music, laughter, the clink of crystal, all of it dulled beneath the weight of his realization. He began, voice low. Her. He didn't even remember my name. Just the role I played in his life, the position I once occupied in his shadow. Not Helena. Not the woman in front of him. Just a ghost he'd buried and never expected to rise again. You disappeared, he said. One day you were gone. You never even spared you the theatrics? I cut in, cool and unbothered. Why would I scream at a man who didn't even think I was worth introducing? He looked away, ashamed, or maybe just embarrassed that I'd pulled the curtains back on his past. I didn't mean to hurt you. I raised an eyebrow. No, you meant to hide me. That's worse. He reached for words, but none came. I gave him a small, cordial nod, like I would any unremarkable acquaintance, and turned to leave. He followed me. Wait. Helena. So he finally remembered. I stopped but didn't face him. You should enjoy the party, Elliot. These people only remember winners. His breath caught, just enough to make me smile. Because he wasn't a winner anymore. Not in this room. Not in this industry. And certainly not in my game. Over the following weeks, I turned the screws tighter. The co-founder I'd been feeding offers to? He took the bait. Walked away from North Verge with proprietary data and quietly joined a firm I'd recently acquired. A quiet transfer. No headlines. Just enough to destabilize Elliot's core. The distribution deal Elliot had nearly closed with a major brand fell through when I had one private dinner with their CEO and hinted at potential reputation risks. And the beta launch he had hyped for months? Doomed before it even went live. I arranged for his newest hire, one of his key engineers, to be offered a dream position at a rival firm 2 days before launch. She took it without blinking. By the time Elliot called another meeting with Nexus Capital, he looked haggard. "This is sabotage," he snapped, tossing a file across the boardroom table. I didn't flinch. "That's a strong accusation, Mr. North." He leaned forward. "I know it's you." I folded my hands calmly. "You think I'm dismantling your company out of spite?" "I know you are." "Then you haven't learned anything." He froze. "I don't need revenge," I said. "That would require emotion. What I need is results. My job is to protect our firm's investments. And unfortunately, yours isn't worth protecting." His hands curled into fists. I continued, evenly, "When I left you, I had nothing. No contacts. No safety net. But I learned quickly. I learned what it took to be taken seriously in this world. And I built something for myself, without ever having to beg for a seat at someone else's table." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "That's the difference between you and me, Elliot. You were born with a name. I had to make mine matter." He stared at me like he couldn't recognize what I'd become. Because he couldn't. The woman he knew would have cried, begged, maybe hoped for some parting apology. But I didn't want an apology. I wanted dominance. And I had it. The next week, I pulled our funding. Nexus Capital withdrew its interest publicly. The press had a field day. North Verge's valuation plummeted. Investors jumped ship. Clients backed out of pre-orders. Competitors swooped in like vultures, offering rescue partnerships, ones I had silently orchestrated through subsidiaries. Elliot tried to contain it. Rebranded his product. Pitched to foreign markets. But his name was no longer golden. It was glass, and I had already thrown the first stone. The final blow came quietly. He received a letter. A formal notice from a boutique firm in Singapore that had just acquired controlling interest in North Verge's parent company. The signature at the bottom? Helena Wren. I never heard his scream. But I imagine it was beautiful. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no smug smirks in candlelit offices. No grand speeches declaring Elliot North's ruin. That wasn't my style. Revenge, after all, isn't about the noise. It's about the silence that follows. The hollow space left when someone realizes no one is coming to save them. He tried. In the weeks after the takeover, Elliot made calls. To lawyers. To journalists. To investors who once clung to his every word. But the moment they saw my name on the acquisition paperwork, their enthusiasm cooled. Even the ones who owed him favors began to flake. Because in this industry, power isn't loud. It whispers. It doesn't ask, it decides. And I had become fluent in that language. My firm absorbed the remnants of North Verge like a python swallowing a rabbit, slow, efficient, inevitable. Departments were restructured. Executives replaced. Within a month, Elliot's name was no longer attached to the company he founded. Not even as a footnote. He sent one last email. Subject: I know what this is. Message: you've made your point. You've won. Is that enough? I didn't reply. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about rewriting the narrative. He once taught me what it felt like to be invisible. To be dressed up and locked away. To be not quite enough to show the world. Now I was the world. And he was the one waiting in the wings, watching doors close where they used to open for him. One evening, Davis stepped into my office, a manila folder in hand. He's applying for consulting roles, he said without preamble. Small firms. Startups mostly. No bites so far. Not surprised, I said, not looking up. He's reaching out to your old contacts. The ones from the early days. I finally looked at him. And? They're loyal. Of course they were. I had built those relationships from scratch, without trading charm for access. People trusted me not because of what I said, but because I never pretended to be what I wasn't. Davis placed the folder on my desk. We can blackball him if you want. Quietly. Just a few nudges in the right places. I considered it. I really did. But then I closed the folder and slid it back. No, I said. Let him knock on doors. Let him smile and sell and hope. Let him get dressed up and feel invisible in rooms that used to bow when he walked in. Davis smiled. That's colder than anything we've done so far. It's not cold, I said. It's familiar. Because that was the final twist of the knife. Not destruction, but helplessness. Not fury, but silence. The same silence I'd lived in while he paraded around as if I didn't exist. The last I heard, Elliot had moved out of the city. Rumors said he was consulting for a small AI firm in Prague, using a fake name to avoid the trail of failure he left behind. I didn't care to verify. His story no longer mattered. Mine was still being written. And it was only getting better. One night, months later, I was invited to speak at a global summit for tech innovation. The crowd was packed. Influencers, diplomats, rising entrepreneurs. I stepped onto the stage wearing a white suit and no fear. My name is Helena Wren, I began, calm and clear. I wasn't born into this world. I wasn't invited. But I came anyway. And I stayed. Applause. Flashes. Camera shutters. And if there's one thing I've learned, I continued, it's that people may try to keep you small, to convince you to be quiet. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, silence is a crown. And the room stood. Not for the girl behind the door. But for the woman who built the palace. It would have been easy to forget him. To file Elliot North away in a dusty drawer labeled past mistakes and never open it again. But memory is a strange thing. It doesn't ask permission. It replays moments uninvited. A look. A word. The cold touch of rejection. So when I saw his name again, on a forgotten guest list sent to me for review, I paused. The summit was in Vienna. A private investment event for rising markets in Eastern Europe. I wasn't planning to attend. Until I saw that he was. Why would he go? Davis asked when I forwarded him the file. Because he thinks I've moved on, I said. He thinks the storm has passed. Davis smirked. Do we want to remind him? I didn't answer. Instead, I booked my flight. The event was held in an old opera house turned conference venue. Velvet curtains, gold trim, chandeliers heavy with history. I wore a black satin gown and walked through the crowd like I belonged to the building itself. I spotted him before he saw me. He looked smaller. Not physically. But something in his posture. His suit didn't fit as perfectly as it used to. His eyes darted more. Smiles that once commanded a room now barely earned a glance. He was talking to a group of junior investors. Younger men with sharp haircuts and sharper tongues. They weren't impressed. I waited. And then, I stepped into his line of sight. He froze mid-sentence. I didn't smile. Just met his gaze and moved past him into the main hall, where I was scheduled to speak in 20 minutes. He followed, of course. He always followed. I could feel the weight of his stare even as I took the stage. But this time, I wasn't the shadow in the corner. I was the light. I opened my speech with a story. A girl who once stood in the back of boardrooms, unacknowledged. A girl who watched her boyfriend dazzle crowds while pretending she wasn't real. The audience leaned in. She thought she needed him, I said softly. Until she realized the only thing she ever needed was a reason. Pause. Silence. And now, she doesn't wait to be introduced. She builds the room. Applause erupted. Elliot was still watching. Jaw tight. Eyes locked on mine like he finally understood. Afterward, as guests filtered into the reception, he found me. You planned this, he said again, but this time the accusation lacked fire. It sounded like surrender. I turned. You say that every time you lose. He looked exhausted. I thought I was helping you back then. Keeping you away from that world. Protecting you. From what? Success? Or your own shame? He flinched. You were never ashamed of me, I said. You were ashamed of being seen with someone who hadn't been polished yet. Someone real. I was stupid. Yes, I agreed. But stupid men rise all the time. You just didn't think I'd rise faster. He laughed bitterly. You know, when I figured out who you were, I thought I could fix it. Maybe start over. I looked him dead in the eye. You don't get to start over in a game you didn't know you were playing. That shut him up. He nodded slowly, then stepped back. You win. It wasn't a surrender. It was a eulogy. Not for me. For the man he used to be. As I turned away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about showing him what real power looked like. It wasn't money. It wasn't a name. It was walking into a room with your head high, your past behind you, and your future waiting in gold-plated silence. And it was mine now. After Vienna, I never heard from him again. No calls. No emails. No backdoor messages through mutual contacts. Elliot North had finally learned how to disappear. And that, in its own way, was his final mistake. Because the ones who vanish are easier to bury. He faded into the backdrop of the industry, just another name whispered in cautionary tales. The man who had everything and lost it to the woman he once tried to hide. He became a lesson, not a legacy. I didn't speak of him after that. Not in interviews, not in boardrooms, not even to Davis. My story had moved on. And I wanted everyone to know, my success wasn't built on revenge. It was built on remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be dismissed. To be spoken over. To be molded into something palatable. Remembering every quiet moment I sat at the edge of Elliot's world, knowing I was worth more than the silence he forced me into. And more than that, it was built on the work. I worked harder than he ever had. I studied markets while he partied. I took meetings while he chased clout. I learned how power moved, not through noise, but through subtle shifts in loyalty, influence, and ownership. One morning, I opened a file from a new acquisition team. They'd secured a failing tech publication with a dusty archive and dwindling traffic. Buried deep in its files was an old article, The Young Guns of Tomorrow, Elliot North and the Future of Human Interface Design. I clicked it. There he was. 24 years old, jaw sharp, eyes full of himself. Talking about changing the world, about vision, about cutting-edge partnerships. There was a mention of his longtime partner, but no name. Just a sentence, his girlfriend, said to be a student, prefers to stay out of the spotlight. I stared at the line. That used to be me. Hidden even in the fine print. Now I owned the company that owned the article. I instructed the editor to keep the peace. Don't delete it. Don't bury it. Just quietly update the author bio to reflect the current reality. Just a small, silent correction at the bottom of the page, North Verge was dissolved in 2024 after acquisition by Helena Wren's Nexus Group. Let it live. Let it breathe. Let it haunt. Later that week, I hosted a closed-door summit for the top 50 emerging AI firms. No press. No cameras. Just power in its purest form, people with ideas and the money to make them real. As I walked through the private lounge, one of the young CEOs approached me nervously. I hope this isn't a weird question, he said, but, were you ever connected to Elliot North? I paused. Why do you ask? I just came across some old interviews, he said. He talked a lot about legacy. About disruption. But when you look at the industry now, he's completely gone. And you're everywhere. I nodded once. Funny how that works. He smiled. You're the reason I started my company, you know. Not because of him. Because of what you built after him. And just like that, it was sealed. I wasn't his shadow anymore. He had become mine. But I didn't need him to fall to feel whole. He had already done that to himself. I simply made sure no one offered him a hand. Years passed. And Elliot North became a name most people didn't remember. The startups he once mentored collapsed or were absorbed. The last company where he tried to rebuild quietly folded after a minor data scandal. Investors stopped taking his calls. Journalists stopped caring. But I remembered. I remembered not because of who he was, but because of who I had become after him. Helena Wren. Founder of Nexus Group. One of the most powerful voices in tech and innovation. The kind of woman who didn't just walk into rooms, she decided who else got in. The kind of woman who didn't need revenge to validate her rise. But I never forgot where I started. One day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Helena, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I see it now. All of it. The way I dismissed you. Diminished you. You were always sharper than me. Stronger. I just didn't know how to handle a woman I couldn't control. I hope, in some quiet way, you found what you were looking for. I read it once. Then fed it into the shredder. Because I wasn't looking for apologies. I was building an empire. And I didn't need the ghosts of small men haunting my halls. My name was being etched into architecture, into patents, into textbooks and keynote stages. Young women looked to me and saw possibility. They no longer asked for permission to speak. They didn't wait to be introduced. They arrived already holding the room. One morning, during a rare moment of stillness, I walked into the studio of an artist I'd quietly commissioned years ago. The room was quiet, the canvas covered. Is it finished? I asked. He nodded. Would you like to see it now? He pulled away the cloth. It was a portrait. Of me. Not as I looked now, but as I once was. 19. Soft eyes. Hands folded in my lap. Wearing the simple dress I'd once saved for a gala I never got to attend. But behind the girl was something else. A shadow of a woman, taller, sharper, untouchable. Dressed in white. Crown of light behind her. One hand on the girl's shoulder, the other on a doorframe. I didn't need to ask the title. It was written in gold in the corner. The girl he tried to hide. I stared at it for a long time. And for the first time in years I felt something unfamiliar. Not rage. Not vindication. Not triumph. Peace. Because the girl he tried to hide had become the woman he could never outrun. The woman who didn't just survive his world, she owned it. And she would never be erased. Not again. Not ever.